Thank you all and welcome. I am Courtney Adair Johnson here with Tennessee State University Department of Art and Design. We're here today with Art Talk with Rick Griffith, sorry. And I'm gonna show some, a few images just to start us out. And while I say a little bit about him and try and pronounce words. So let's see how I do. It actually takes all my words away, but as you can see, Rick is a screen printer and plays around with graphic design and words. I'm going to go through these images quick so I can get back to my paragraphs that I can read. He's a brand designer. He's a product designer. He is there to show us what is going on and what we need to be seeing and thinking about. This project I think is super awesome, so I highly recommend checking it out, blarb.org. And let's see where my paragraphs went. So graphic designer, master letterpress artist, and explorer of language, history, politics, science, music, and ethics. Rick is truly orientated towards self-reliance, disruption, creative compassion, and independent thought. He's been featured in multiple museums and universities across the states, along with printed publications and manuscripts like Columbia University Print Magazine, AIGA 50 Books, 50 Covers. He is the design director of Matter. You can check out Matter at morematter.com. Fascinating site. You can tap into all the businesses, cultural and civic engagement that's going on in Denver and around the country that Rick's had his hands on. So check that out. I'll throw some links in the comment as we go along, and I'll turn this over to Rick Griffith and Kalina Selves.
Hello, welcome everyone. And Rick, thank you so much again for joining us today. We're super excited. I'm a huge fan of your work and just the way that you approach art and design making. So a lot of the questions that I have to do with process and just the way that you think and wanting to get a little bit more insight into that brain of yours. And so as the conversation is going, students and our guests, please feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, join in, and this will hopefully be a really lively discussion. So I will start with the first question. I was looking at a talk that you did for a creative morning several years ago, and you talked about research and sort of the significance of research in your work. But when we think about research, oftentimes we think about it in terms of looking back at what's already been done. But when we think about innovation, we oftentimes think about it in terms of what has not been done yet. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between research and innovation as you see it, and maybe the role that those have played in your own work?
Wow, that's a tough one already. I think it's probably a good idea to say that in that talk, I was very excited to be creating I was trying to create more understanding around how a design action that was sort of shrouded in capitalism was actually a project that was for the public good. And this is what was going on at the time. I was opening an ice cream shop, and the ice cream shop was a flavored soft serve ice cream shop, which if any of you guys do soft serve, you know that like you get the chocolates, you get the vanilla, you get the twist, and you don't complain. That's it. And I had developed a flavoring system for soft serve that was able to um, steep in the dairy, and I was doing experiments with food so that I could have flavored soft serve ice cream. And flavored soft serve ice cream, like exotic flavors. Like we had a Earl Grey tea flavor, we had peanut butter flavored, we had matcha flavored, we had so many cool flavors. And I was basically making a hobby for about 6 months of making new flavors of ice cream. All of this was going on because I um, I was overwhelmed with this notion that young people didn't have safe places to go to do their schoolwork. So what we were doing was we were making a place that was safe for young people to do schoolwork, and then we were inviting tutors and community members with resources like time and expertise to help train young people in what they needed training. And then we also had, because we were right next door to a car garage, we also had oil changing, we had um, we had tire changing, all for young people, and we had financial education as well. And so what was going on at the time that I was doing this particular project was that I was migrating the majority of my thinking in enterprise thinking into this space of social good through this mysterious cloak of ice cream shop. Anyone who wanted to pay full price for an ice cream could totally pay full price for an ice cream. But if you were there and you gave your time to a young person with a question, or if you were there to tutor somebody, you got your ice cream for free. If you were there to do your homework, you got your ice cream for free. If you were there just to pick up your kid, you can get an ice cream for free. Like anyone who was in the community wasn't paying for ice cream. It was only people outside of the community that were paying for ice cream. So we were basically making the gentrifiers pay, and, and we were holding space for all of our young people that needed to grow and learn. Nothing wrong with the project at all. It was a great project. It was unfortunately short-lived because at the time that that was going on, my wife died. And so everything shifted for me. The entire sort of universe went upside down, and I had to refocus my energy because it was really her project. And I was the guy behind the flavors and the big picture, but she was running it, and she got fatally ill and died. And so the project was over in a pretty brief period of time, like less than 6 months. The challenge for me and the notion of research and innovation is really to be, I believe, and this is when I say research in this particular circumstance, I was talking about a kind of ad hoc gap analysis that would tell me what the community needed, right? So when we talk about gap analysis, we're talking about ideas of like, oh, we should have this in our community. And then the question answer scenario is, why isn't it already there? What are the barriers to entry for that project or for that enterprise? You know, why haven't people done it previously? What's the problem space around it? And then what is no longer in our way that we could do it, right? And what are we doing differently to what other people could be doing? And this is sort of research innovation matrix, where you ask yourself, is there a reason why someone hasn't done this before? And if that reason is valid, is there a way that in this time and in this place, you can remove these barriers? And this is true in general. This is the way that my mind works and has worked since I was a young person, since I was in my late teens. or even sooner, you know, like earlier. The idea of being a graphic designer was just right there next to the idea of being a DJ. Why? Well, because, you know, if you can't play an instrument, maybe you should just learn to play the stereo really well. And if you, you know, if you play music for other people in between the sets of the bands, you know, maybe you should learn how to make album covers, or you should maybe learn how to do promotion, and so on, so on, and so forth. And all of these things kind of at the age of 16 years old came together, and I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure I want to be the person that makes album covers for a living. And that was it. Like, and that was you know, 35 years ago. And so in the spirit of of gratitude, I just put it out there and say it's entirely possible that a young person could say, this is what I want to be, and then just go be it. It's entirely possible. You know, you don't do it alone, but using a certain amount of research to sort of validate your direction, and then using a certain amount of courage to move past the obstacles and try and identify ways of diminishing the power and the authority of any given obstacle is a pretty important thing to do. And and more importantly, it's an important thing to learn to do at a young age. So when you get gaslit and get told that you can't do something, that you're thinking to yourself, oh, I must be talking to the wrong person, right? Because that's what it's about. I mean, honestly, like, reality is what you is what you understand. And if you get told enough times that it's not a possibility for you to do something, it becomes part of your reality. It becomes the means by which you understand your value. And I think it's really important to, you know, I didn't know what gaslighting was until a year ago, but I sure as hell experienced it, you know. And I think that it's up to us to have our own decision matrix and not let other people enter that and sort of disrupt what would be a relationship with reality, and B, a relationship with our own selves and our own abilities and our own sort of sense of competency. And so that's something which I think is really important. And I've been speaking about this as a sort of an important lever or pulley in the systems of life, for a long time now, and most of the time because so many of my audiences have been predominantly white people talking about graphic design. I've made like sort of prolonged eye contact with the women in the room and saying, you know what I mean? You know, because that's the person that has been treated exactly that same way in that room. In this circumstance, I really believe I'm speaking to everyone present, and for the sake of just being really clear, I don't believe that we can do anything. I believe that we can do what we decide to do, you know, and you really have to take a sense of personal responsibility for your own trajectory, and you have to decide to do it. You have to be informed enough to decide to do it. And so that to me is really the framing of that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, so much of what you said, I mean, it just makes perfect sense. And, you know, you were talking about, you know, in the example of the ice cream, you know, really problem solving, right? And a lot of what art and design is about is problem solving, but largely, you know, it's framed under kind of a commercial or like capitalistic, you know, model. But where does your consideration or concern for like social good come from? Where does that originate? Where did that nugget begin? And is it connected to identity?
So when I was so much younger, I was living in the UK. I'm a British-born West Indian person, and so when I was so much younger, there was a famous thing called the Brixton riots in Southeast London, and I'm from that part of London. My parents, much like what we saw this year with people boarding up their houses or boarding up their stores because of riots, we lived very close to what would be the main drag, the high street, and my parents boarded up our windows when we were 13, 14 years old, and the people that were marching down the street were nationalists. So if you think of it like Nazis stepping down your street, telling everybody that they owned the street. This was my experience when I was a young person, and British nationalists were under the name the National Front, and uh, and they were widely understood to be the worst element that Britain had made. I was too young to participate in that experience in a way that would show my rage. In fact, I was so sheltered by my parents from most of that, that by the time I was 15 and a half years old, actually, they pulled us out of the country. They brought us to the US. So my parents were so shaken by that event that they actually immigrated twice in their lives, once from the West Indies to the UK, had their children, and then again fled with their children to the United States. When I arrived in the United States, I was dropped into the Washington, D.C. punk scene, and that's where I encountered a number of different scenarios that would teach me about social justice. I was learning about it by being in the center of it, and of course, Washington, D.C. is a great place to have an act of civil disobedience, if you will. It's also a great place to be a young person who cared about music and about justice and about equal rights in the 80s. And so I was fortunate enough to be dropped into that. Later on, I traveled around the country with a pansexual person named Genesis Peorich, and Genesis, who died a few years back, was one of the most important people in my life, and opened my eyes to conditions and scenarios that were existing for queer people and trans people and people who wanted to be free in general. And I made it part of my life's work to connect with people exactly the way that they wanted to be seen and spoken to, heard, and to be a part of that. And so I've been a part of that for a long time. And as various types of experiences come my way, I find that I'm fortunate that I have the resources to give my time or give some other resources like money or my talent to various causes that have got whole personness at their core, sort of recognizing people in their whole and truest selves. And so that's my goal here. I also have 4 children. I have 2 children from my marriage, and my partner has 2 children from their marriage, and we're both widows. And we have 4 children, and those 4 children, those 4 young people, are important enough to us to understand where they're at and to want them to be proud of us as we move forward in time and space. So I would just argue and say it's reality, like the reason why we are fighting this fight and the reason why we do what we do is because of reality, because we understand what is true and what is just, and that we have no choice but to be with what is true and what is just. If we let capitalism or consumerism or anything else get in the path of that, I would just argue that it should come before that. Many people would say things like, oh, when I have enough, I'll give all the rest of my money to so-and-so. And by the time you sort of find the word enough, and by the time you find a framing around what is enough, and, by the time you try and get your grip on what you'll need to die with and leave everything on the dance floor, so to speak, you've already lived a whole life. What should come before that is a life that has justice at its center. What should come before that is a life that is in community and not siloed by commercial action and capitalism.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go ahead and jump to one of our students, And then I'll circle back around. I want to follow up though on something you said about the punk identity in the DC area, but I'll wait a second to get to that. Tariq Palmer, I see you there. You wanna unmute yourself? Oh, can you? I don't know if you can. Let's see. Okay. Oh, we can't hear you, Tariq.
What's on your mind? Nope, can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Uh-oh. Let's see.
How fast can you type, Tariq?
All right, maybe he'll reconnect. I think he may have disconnected.
Looks like Artin.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you unmute, or let's see if we can get you to?
Yeah,
There you
yeah, I can.
go. Okay.
Okay, what's up?
Two things. The first was a clarification. Genesis, as in like Genesis, the performance artist.
Are you familiar with Genesis Breyer PRH?
Not particularly. A while back, I had to watch about an hour-long interview with them, and I found a lot of their perspectives on the art world and on sort of performance art in general very interesting.
Yeah, that's the person for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
The second thing was just, it was really nice to hear all of that, because much of what I've been thinking about, especially throughout COVID, has been on that same wavelength. So it's been nice to hear someone else talking about the same sort of thing.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think it's like people say the word priority all the time, and they use that as a shield to be like in this relationship with the people in their immediate geography, the people who they gave birth to, the people who they live with, you know. And I think that most of the time, if you are a person who is thriving, the people in your immediate space already thrive. And you can find people outside of that who are not thriving, who need to be served, who need to be like cared for. And this is at the center of the conversation on equity. Equity is another way of saying care, you know, care that someone doesn't have the same starting point in this race, care that someone else doesn't have their basic needs met, care that, you know, while you have your priorities, some people will never even get to the place of having those priorities. It's just so far away from them. And so, you know, it's a mindset, and it's not a single action. It's a mindset that makes every action into an opportunity to put someone else first if you can, and to be in gratitude and acknowledgement of what you have. You know, I tell every young Black person I know, I tell them, you start earning your college tuition the first day of high school. Fact. Like some white kid could figure it out on his senior year and be like, I'm good, I'll just figure it out. I've got lots of extracurriculars. I'm a pretty good athlete, whatever. And they could figure it out. Like schools will just take them and take their money, and it's fine.
It's
But
the
in order to
difference.
qualify,
It's like you start at a different point, and also you're running a much more difficult course than many of the other racers.
right. And also it's a longer course. It's like something where you have to be mature enough to be doing the right thing at 14 and 15 years old. Otherwise, it's going to show up against you by the time you want the next opportunity. And I think it's super critical to be aware of that. And then also to be aware of the next level that is not even there yet. Like the young person who is like totally challenged to get to school on time and is being disciplined all the time. And instead of like getting the assistance that they need, they show up in a way that like makes them a prime candidate for the school to prison pipeline, you know? And just one stupid move in high school gets them put into juvie, and then gets them put into prison, and so on and so forth. And it's just like we have to pay more attention. You know, we just have to. And it's not the only thing we have to pay attention to, but it's some of the things that have been on my mind recently. And having 3 kids in college right now and one who's done, you know, it's like a really serious thing for me to want other people's young people to get to college if that's what they want to do, to be funded in whatever venture that they want to be funded in, to have a sense of self-reliance and a sense of opportunity in this world. You know, that's how you make a better citizen, is that you help them be in gratitude for what they have, you know, and give them a chance. And thanks for chiming in.
Yeah, that was an excellent question. Thank you for that. I think we'll go to a couple of more student questions maybe. And I see Tariq has rejoined, so we'll give him a try. Oh,
Courtney, do you have those links that I sent to you in email? There are, you should have an email from me with some links for the chat, and one of them is the link for Genesis P Origin.
oh, good.
I didn't see an email, but I'll.
I did it just moments before we jumped on. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we'll put that in there. That'd be really great. Tariq, you wanna give it a try? Oh, sorry, I gotta push the button, I think. Okay. Oh no, we can't hear you. I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening. But if you want to put something in the chat, feel free. We had talked before, and I think he had a question, but all right, anyone else have their hand up before let's see.
I mean, maybe it's a good time to just say this to the group that's assembled here today. You know, if you're wondering, you know, how I'm at all qualified to have this conversation with you, it's super simple. If I'm not qualified, don't sweat it. Like, let it go. You've got other things you want to do, and do it. Make it more important than what this is about. But here's the thing, right? I have persevered. I've done 35 years of wanting to be a graphic designer and then being one. And what I've done is I never conceived of my life out of poverty. And yet here I am living a life out of poverty. I never conceived having children and having a full existence, but here I am having children and a full existence. You know, I never conceived having museum exhibits of my work, but here I am on my 3rd museum exhibit. You know, what's happening is that I feel qualified to help you. This is not about me. I don't need to hear myself talk anymore, even though I am a person who, for whatever reason, seldom tires of the sound of his own voice. What's at stake right now is what you want from me, what Tariq wants from me, what Jess Greer wants from me, what Cynthia Gadden wants from me. That's what's at stake right now. And if I can be in service of you and your needs, then please put me in service of you and your needs. Liz Willis, Jordan Jones, Gene Duncan, Carly Fuller, right? Jim Bryant, Kai Hessler, Squeaky Tiki, that's great. But, you know, put me in service of you. Here's a question. How do I deal with burnout, feeling uninspired or unmotivated to design? Great question. I actually do so many different things in every day that if I am uninspired by one action, I will simply do another one. I have lists and lists of things to get done, including the reality and the opportunity to create a warm-up exercise. So a good example would be, like, I did a warm-up exercise this morning, and let's see, you would have to pin me, you'd have to figure out how to get this nice and big, but because I'm not even big on my own screen. I don't know if what's going on here, but maybe I'll pin myself. Is that what I do? Yeah, pin myself. There you go.
I have you pinned.
Yeah, so this particular piece I did 9 o'clock this morning, well, 8 o'clock this morning. Took me about 20 minutes, and it will eventually play a role in making something else in the future. And this piece I made at 7:30 this morning. Now, these might not be very interesting to you, and I totally accept that. It's no problem. But my point is that what I do to move myself through being unmotivated is an exercise. I flex the muscle that I want to use during the day, and I do a warm-up. And I have drawers and drawers full of collages and type treatments and drawings that I get started with, and I do it with the intention of being even more productive in the future of the day. So I do it to get started. If I'm pleased with it, I stop. If I'm not pleased with it, I keep going until I feel the flow, you know? And then when I've got something else to do, I switch gears and get that done. And when I've got a good idea, I switch gears and get that done. And I have maybe 5 different things that I could do in any given day, including go downstairs to my printing press and finish typesetting something, or start typesetting something, or I can reach into my, handy dandy book of like things that I want to improve on in my writing and sketches, and I can adjust this, and then I can get to work. But like for me, it's have many things to do so that when it's time to do them, you have choices about how to use your energy and what energy is required for your action. Yeah. So Squeaky Tiki, thank you for your question. And I just love that Squeaky Tiki name. That's terrific. So yeah.
So yeah, so I think Squeaky Tiki actually asked the second question. That question came from Lisa originally.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Squeaky Tiki, another one. How do you feel your work has evolved over the years? What has changed your work, and what has remained consistent? So I'll tell you what's changed. Truth. I've actually gotten good at this. That's what's changed. I used to actually be terrible. I'm not kidding. In my mind, I made terrible graphic design. And I laugh a little bit today in this understanding that like I didn't start out being great. Even though I started out wanting to be much, much greater than I feel today. Like today, I don't wake up being like, I'm going to be the best graphic designer in the world. Ah! I don't wake up like that every day now. I wake up like in my joy, in my gratitude, ready to do some work. And the opportunities to work are already there. They've already piled up. What happened in the past was I just tried, and I wasn't very good, and I wasn't very good, and I wasn't very good. And then one day I was like, I should probably learn this. And I just went sort of outside of the task and started doing things in front of it, just the same way that my parents raised me. Like they were like, oh, you need to be 2 chapters ahead of the class in order to be effective in your class. You need to know as much as the teacher. And I was like, that's just crazy talk. But when you're your own teacher, which is what I've been, it actually means something to be ahead of the curve. And when you're a professional competing in a world full of creative human beings, very competent creative human beings, some of them you really like a lot and you think they're super talented, like the people who are hosting this, like David too. David and Kalina and Courtney, they're all super talented people. How am I going to be competitive with them? And the answer is to be the best version of me and to be 2 steps ahead of whatever it is that I'm trying to put out there. And so what's changed for me is that I've been willing to be in front of it. And I've also gotten better over time, and allowing myself to be better has been a really big step in it, and taking advantage of opportunities that come my way, and treating other people who I admire, treating them as people who I can openly admire and people who I can openly be fans of, and then also knowing that I'm also competing with them for the next thing, the next invention. Anybody who is interested in inventing the next thing in graphic design or letterpress printing is my competitor. But in a really nice way, we're all doing it together. You know, anyone who is happy where they're at, that's cool. I like it when you're happy where you're at. Because if you're standing still and I'm moving, I'm good with that. I'm altogether good with that. I don't know if this resonates with anybody else, but when other people are standing still and they're like kind of trying to figure out where they're at, and you're like, yeah, no, cool, I'll see you later. You know, like that's so important to have a little bit of your own speed and a little bit of your own fuel to make that happen. And so I'm really excited by what's happened over the last 35 years, from being interested in everything to being interested in some things to being interested in like very focused things, and then taking that energy and multiplying it by 4, right? I'm interested in 4 very, very serious things. And anytime I want to work, I can go to any of those 4 places to work. David's got his hand up. I'll come back to the chat and do the questions in there in a minute.
Yeah, I actually just posted it in there, but my question, I guess, was a follow-up to that, to what you just shared. How has your internal / external voice evolved?
Oh yeah, that shit's crazy.
In the work or outside of the work?
My partner said it really well not too long ago. She said something about like, you can't be that and also have people take you seriously, but you can be someone that people take seriously, and then you can also do that. And it was this very interesting sort of prioritization about like who I present and how I present myself, as a serious person or as a person who loves to be loved and loves to be liked and likes to be the party and so on and so forth. And I used a lot of humor to heal from my own traumas. And so, am I a funny person or am I not a funny person? And how does that reconcile? And so I think, boy, I was probably more confident for less good reason in my younger self. And now I am less confident, and that's terrible because I have great reason to be confident in my elder self.
Right.
It's a mess. It's a fucking mess. Anyone who struggles with anxiety and then sees a person who presents as confident and thinks that that person doesn't is wrong. It's just a more advanced form of anxiety where you can present as a confident person in some place, and then it doesn't take much to knock you off of that and to have you second guessing yourself, you know? So it's an interesting challenge. I used to be less interested in writing. Now I'm very interested in writing. I used to be more interested in letter spacing and having the perfect kerning pairs and all of that. Now I could care less. I mean, on a very fundamental level, I think that there's room for terrible graphic design that does exactly the right thing in its amateurism, and it works perfectly in its amateurism. And therefore, I remove my previous objection about letter spacing from the atmosphere that I live in. I remove all of that sort of conceit that everything has to be perfectly letter spaced and we have to use perfect typography to communicate anything. I remove all of those previous judgments and I replace it with, how is your life? What do you do? Does it do good? Carry on. You know, I mean, a fundamental shift in what I judge, who I judge, and how I judge them. That's changed.
Can I jump in with a follow-up question there, actually? So, you know, actually, I saw you do a couple of talks before, and you spoke a little bit about, you know, the importance of having a worldview and knowing oneself and others, and it relates very much to what you just said. But you're also, you know, a master letterpress artist, right? So how do we like balance this like need for craft, right? Or like learning craft, or what's your advice to young artists and designers when they're trying to prioritize what's important in their education? Is it, you know, this like larger worldview that's focused on history and geography and politics and what's going on in society? Or is it, you know, learning the craft of what they're in school for? You know, where's that balance?
I have this very interesting challenge with the word balance. I believe people use the word balance when they want both things. They just don't ever say it. So if you remove the word balance, and if you remove the idea of there being a dichotomy like either or, and just if we all kind of lean in and say, I want both things. I want to be guided by my sense of self, and I also want to be guided by a quest for knowledge outside of myself, right? Both these things in action happen all the time. And so I would say that it's a 2x2 that makes 4 squares, right? And the 4 squares are self, things other than self at the extreme, right? So everything that is inside you and everything that is outside of you. And then there is quiet, and then there is community. And everything that is inside you that is like alone is what we would call meditation. And what Marie appears to be doing right now, like maybe typesetting, you know, is a form of meditation. And this action is very helpful to your inside knowledge, your knowledge of yourself and your quiet space. Whether it's actual meditation or whether it's an act that performs in the same way that meditation performs, it is still very useful to you. So find something to put yourself into, right? And then the other side of that is community and everything outside of yourself, and that is in service, right? So if you know yourself, and you know yourself in both the quiet ways and the loud ways, and then you know all things other than self as it relates to yourself and your community in the quiet and loud ways, then as these things grow, a whole person grows. And so it's not either, it's both. And what really, excuse me for saying this, what really fucks things up is when people feel alone forever. When people feel like they have no people to be with, or when they have no community to either belong to or serve. If you have no community to serve, guilt and shame. If you have no community to be a part of, fear, anxiety, and loneliness, depression. So all of these things are super important. Because someone said in there, can I talk about more about being my own teacher? Because I'm my own teacher, because I've been my own teacher, what's happened for me is I've taken my own health seriously. I've taken my own sort of sense of wholeness seriously, because a broken version of me couldn't get this shit done. And so one way of reconciling that is to talk about when I made my first fortune. The term "I made my first fortune" is a very British concept. It comes from this notion of having a stick with a hanky, and my lunch tied onto the hanky and me wandering off to the big city. There's a British pantomime called Puss in Boots or Dick Whittington, and it's all about this very Dickensian life. And one of my favorite Dickens books is called The Life and Times of Nicholas Nickleby. And it's a story of a young person going off to seek their fortune. And the first fortune I made was $1,000 in my bank account without having to already owe it to someone else, right? The second fortune I made was $3,000 in my bank account without it being owed to someone else, right? And in both of those circumstances, I bought therapy. I just bought therapy. When I arrived in the United States, my family completely imploded, destroyed itself, and I was on my own. I was on my own. The trauma of the UK was already big for my parents. And later on, what had happened in the United States was my father was basically a Black man trying to find work in the US in the same way that I was a young Black person trying to find a place to study in the United States. And none of the schools in Fairfax County, Virginia, wanted anything to do with me when they saw the color of my skin. They just assumed I would be a drag on their scores, on their test scores. They assumed I would be a negative effect on their overall metric. And then one day, my mom took me to this school, and she was at her wit's end, for sure, because she had been just told to go to a different school and a different school and a different school. She was at her wit's end, and she just let it fly. She's like, how is this a thing? How is this real? My son has studied Latin for 6 years. He has studied biology, chemistry, and physics independently of each other, and your curriculum offers a general science class. How are you judging my child in this way? And it was just a chant, but the Latin teacher of the school was there. And she said, your son can speak Latin? And she goes, yeah, just test him, do whatever. And the Latin teacher pulled me aside and we had a conversation in Latin. And she's like, makes a signal to the administrator and says, like, let's take him. And she basically made a deal with my mom and said, if he joins the Latin club, we'd love to have him. We're having trouble making it past the semifinals at state. And sure enough, I took them to the championship 2 years in a row. Latin saved my life. I don't know, whatever. It's absurd, but that's a real experience. And my father was having the same experience as an adult man, being told that he had no value. And that contributed to the end of my family as I understood it. So from pretty early on, I kind of got a sense of what trauma was in store for me in the United States as a young person, and that has informed myself for a long time now. And wanting to make sure that people are not underestimated and making sure that people aren't judged entirely on the color of their skin and not given opportunities. That's been a big thing for me. So I don't know, did I answer the question? I feel like I did it.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And it sort of reminds me, you were talking about the punk identity in the 80s, and
Oh, yeah.
and I wrote a quote down and that you had said, and it said you felt like you had to be doing the right thing if you're going to look like that.
Yeah.
And so
my mother,
yeah.
Yeah, my mother was always like, you can't even stand next to the kid who's doing the wrong thing. You can't even stand next to him. You can be doing the right thing, but if you're standing next to the kid doing the wrong thing, and if he's white, you're going to jail for it. That's that. So she installed in me a kind of sense of, you really can't do bad things because Black people get caught doing things that are not bad and then made bad, and we are the scapegoats of all bad action. And you got to watch who you spend your time with. You got to be careful who you hang out with, and you can't be drawn into a place where the circumstances are, because the circumstances are different for you, where the consequences are going to fall on you for other people's action. And so I had a mohawk and wore punk rock clothing, leather jackets and jeans and boots and whatever. And but I was very much a I was a Boy Scout. Yeah, I was not sexually active until I was 17. I didn't do drugs until much later. And drinking wasn't really a thing for me, and to be honest, it still isn't. Um, the the thing about punk rock that's so, I think the right word to say is, it's such a vindication, is that judging people for how they look is not okay anymore. The ship has sailed, whether it's from a cosmetic perspective, whether it's from how someone is transitioning in gender identities, whether it's someone who's cross-dressing, whether it's someone who is big or fat or in a fat body, or whatever terms we want to put it in, it's just not okay anymore. And this is an extension, it's a magical extension of the idea that, like, people get to be called what they want to be called, they also get to be treated the way they want to be treated, and they also get to look the way they want to look. And this is something that was a long time coming for this country, and I'm sort of proud to be on the other side of that. Especially that I still look a little bit odd anyway. The But being a punk and having that outward appearance of something that was kind of disgusting to most people in the 1980s, revolting, being revolutionary but being revolting, was really important. And it was also important to be a good person while doing that, because then you bring that into focus for everyone else.
Yeah, I love that. And we're kind of running out of our time here, but there were one or two other quick questions maybe that we can throw in there. Freddie Batts, I don't know if you want to ask your question or if you want me to read it out loud.
How about this? I'll read the chat because it's right here. I'm gonna tell Freddie, talk a little bit about your connections to music and influence your work. Yes. So I worked in a record store in Fairfax County, and in that record store, which was also a head shop, I did LSD one day at work, and that was a really incredible experience. What happened while I was on LSD was I looked at this album cover and I was like, whoa, this is really intense, and I was really feeling it and tripping out. And I just said, I think I want to be the person that makes album covers for a living. And then that was it. And being on LSD was an incredible experience. I did it for many years. In fact, I'm still not out of that sort of interest in my life. But what's interesting about psychedelics is that I wrote a piece called The Construct, which it simply states, we can accept the construct exactly the way it is and all the things that it sort of suggests, or we can reshape some part of it, put part of ourselves inside of that, and then begin becoming free. And this is an idea that I've held at my core for a really long time, and that is that we have an opportunity to redesign the construct for ourselves and for the people in our atmosphere, and to be creative with even this action of belief, right? So consumerism is a construct that gives birth to the term African American, because it's another way of saying, like, emergent Black middle class. But it's not saying emergent Black middle class. It's not a promise that Black people become part of the middle class. because what happens to the middle class is that it gets crushed, right? That there's this continuous extremity of like poor people over here and rich people over here, and the middle class is like, you know, it's the powdered sugar on top of a poor donut, you know, like it's nothing. But what happens is that we invent this term called African American, which gives us access to this sort of civilized, you know, this clean identity, not the Negro, not the Black person, but the African American, right? And to speak to the Cosbys and whatever else was going on at that time, you know, the idea of being sanitized by ourselves, right? Like allowing ourselves to be sanitized and prepared for consumerism. This is a construct. You don't actually have to do any of that. You know, like you don't have to be a doctor, and you don't have to be a lawyer, and you don't have to be any of that. You don't have to make a lot of money, right? It's part of what you buy into. And so if you're buying into the community aspect of things, then you share a lot more, which means you need a lot less unique monies to have resources, right? Larger family unit, less individual resources, like less lawnmowers, right? Right? If you are in community with people, one group of people, 20 deep, could share a lawnmower. That's what I mean by this. And I also mean that in the sense of how we use resources, how we achieve resources, what we do with our time and energy. It can either be in this construct of community that we create, or it can be in this mythology that is thrust upon us, which is one of the things that creates capitalism run amok. And it also silos us in the sense of it creates problems for us when we want to connect to other people, because we think of people of haves and have-nots, and you know, we other people for financial reasons and so on and so forth. It's terrible. But if we don't make it ourselves, then we're living in someone else's myth, and it's probably some economist's myth, right? I also want to say one thing about learning the rules and breaking them. That is not a thing that I believe in. I do not believe in learning the rules and then breaking them at all. I think, you know, knowing that there are rules is like showing you the boundaries. It's like basically showing you the fence. You can have some awareness of that if you want to, but that is not a useful technique of combining various forms of research with various forms of innovation. Because as you approach the fence, the scale of the fence changes to your human scale. And your responsibility is to behave with it at the scale that it actually exists in reality, not just the concept of a fence. Plenty of people want you to deal with the concept of a fence, which is automatically tall, automatically difficult. But what if you walk up to it and you find it's made of matchsticks, and you could actually just walk over it, and it's a fence that someone else has created? The rules themselves, you have to accept that there will be some, but knowing someone else's rules and being bound by that and then being forced to be creative, I don't think so. No, thank you. No, thank you. I don't need to live in someone else's reality to explore my own. And another good example of that is that I don't even believe that someone needs to know what the word enlightenment means in order to experience enlightenment. Think about that. All of these terms that we put on ourselves, we don't have to actually decipher and understand and, you know, pull them apart in Wikipedia or any other kind of resource in order to experience them. We can experience them without the language. And so you have to give yourself the space to make rules for yourself. This is part of your self-knowledge. Rules for yourself are easy to make if you make them all the time. And that's why I call it like a sort of a personal ethic, or an ethic of production for yourself, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to speak to that. So yeah, fundamentals, maybe those are someone else's fundamentals. Mine are now community. Mine are about other people besides myself. Those are fundamentals. And you can't be taught that. You have to bring that to bear on the people around you. And you have to change their orientation, and you have to change their way of thinking about the world they live in and the part that they play in it, right? Do I ever say Black Lives Matter? No. Why? Simply because a Black man saying Black Lives Matter is a self-serving statement. I will leave it to a non-Black person to speak that, and I will look at them and I will see them and I will recognize them and I will help them live in that truth. But for me to run around and say that I matter, that's just like Donald Trump saying that he matters. It's self-serving. You've got to see it for what it is. You have to encourage people to ally for everybody involved. Do I care about Asian American people? 100%. 100%. Do I care about the women in my life? 100%. Do I care about 51-year-old Black men? No. Can't make me care about that, right? Because in order for me to breathe and live the way I do, I already am taking care of myself in order to do the things that I do. You can't make me say that out loud like it's important. It isn't. So you have to sort of, you have to see the dimensionality of things. You can't be stuck in binary think. You can't be stuck in like, you know, what is the term people are using these days? Well, I call it binary think. I call it like that sort of everything is not yes or no. It's not do or don't do. It's really much more about your awareness and the multidimensionality of things, right? Being aware of yourself in this way. Let me just see this. Leverage my Black body, I sure as fuck do. Music. If you were forced into a crowd that didn't agree with what they chose to do and say, how do you respond in the mental toll it takes? If you're forced into a crowd that you don't agree with, what they choose to do and say, how do you respond to the mental toll it takes? I suppose the answer to that was that it doesn't happen often enough for me to be traumatized by that. I am very careful about where I put my energy. And as I was a young person moving towards my sort of elder status, I've been more and more careful about that. And so being young and being foolish and allying yourself with people who aren't 100% your people, that's okay. Everything is a learning experience at that point. But as you get older and older and you start to have more self-knowledge, that'll refine, and it should be refined over time. You can't expect to be both like energetic, invincible, and intelligent and wise all at the same time. Young people can't have it all. Just, you know what I mean. Sometimes older people get to be something. Two questions from Tariq. Hi, Tariq, finally. I want to know thoughts on the importance of voting because I'm starting to notice that more young people like me are starting to see it's a waste of time and don't believe in change. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so empathy is, so not caring about voting is apathy like this is a product that you're being sold. I'm going to start by saying that. It's a product. If you look at the election in the British West Indies, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago, the last election was split between young Black voters showing up and young Indian voters, because a lot of the population are Southeast Asian descent. And so what they did was they convinced the young Black voters not to show up. They sold them apathy. And that gave an opportunity for the Southeast Asian voters to put their person in power. I want you to know that that's a real thing. You've got to figure out how to care and participate, and then you've also got to give other people the reason to care and participate. If it's just for the judiciary, good, participate. If it's just for your state house, participate. And as far as I know, Tennessee passed some pretty bad anti-trans healthcare legislation in the House recently. And this has got me very upset. In fact, I'm prepared to break laws in Georgia, and Tennessee, and I don't know how many other states where I am in my old self prepared to break the law, give someone a glass of water, break the law and find some way of giving healthcare to some young trans person who's in transition, who's trying to figure it out. You know, so I mean, we still have to do all this work. Believing I'm still young and know everything was bad, people say, oh, Tariq, your next question. Is the thing you do important to educate yourself in the history of where you come from and Black knowledge? Okay. All right, here it goes. The first time I heard Public Enemy, I was pretty sure I wasn't Black enough. I was pretty sure that I wanted to be more Black. This is an okay feeling to have. Consistently being oriented and reoriented towards aspects of your Blackness is good. Don't be caught up in the past. Just move energetically forward with new knowledge, right? Because we're not born Black children, we're born children, empty vessels, and we happen to be Black. What we learn is not automatically Black wisdom, Indigenous wisdom, brown wisdom. We're taught whatever is in the atmosphere at the time by whoever is there. As we become our own teachers and as we guide ourselves forward in time and space, it's important to just recognize that that's one of the ways, one of the dimensions that we grow is in having more love and more appreciation and more respect for more Black people around the globe, African people, in specifically Ghanaian people, specifically Kenyan people, specifically Nigerian people, specifically Caribbean people, et cetera, et cetera. Just accept that we don't know enough about Blackness because it's so big and so rich and so beautiful. And that whatever we learn and whatever we grasp hold of in this love affair, that it's enough, it's good. Keep doing it, keep falling in love with Blackness from all over the globe. This energy, this idea of learning to be more Black and in greater appreciation with Blackness, this is something which is long overdue. And I'm so glad that there is more opportunity. My Jewish Black daughters are getting a great experience right now because they are learning not just about their West Indian background and not just about their African background and not just about the Middle Passage and not just about Southeast Asia and not just, they're learning about this whole dimension of Indigenous technology and Black technology and brilliance from around the globe. And that Black intelligence and Black excellence is just reality. It's a reality that we haven't found yet. It's a reality that has been denied us for so long, but it is actually reality. So keep up the good work, Tariq. David, what's up? You want to bring this home, wrap it up?
I don't know what to follow up with that with. I mean, that was phenomenal.
To be specific, it's my honor to speak to you all. It's my deepest honor to put this humble self in front of these people who are at the beginning of their journey. And it's incredible for me that I'm sharing with you the results of my experience, not the trauma of my experience, if I can help it, And the results of my experience should give all people two kinds of hope. Anyone who's still listening, two kinds of hope. The first hope is that graphic design is certainly big enough to enjoy and absorb every bit of who you are. There is room for you as a Black graphic designer, as a brown graphic designer, there is plenty of room for you to be in this field. And because you don't see many graphic designers of color in the field, that doesn't mean you should be dissuaded. It means you should move into that space and lock arms with anyone who will hold your hand, you know? The other confident thing that it should create is that you can come to this in a way that can keep you whole as a human being. And it's full of lessons. Some of them are unpleasant, but the idea that I have had the proper experience of being a whole human being throughout the entire life of my children, which is really when it begins for me. Because before my children are born, I care about myself. The moment my children are born, I have to start thinking about other things. And the other thing that I focused my attention on most was, what is the role model that I will be for these people? That's the question. It's not, how am I going to make money to send them to college? It's, am I going to be a broken human being, or am I going to be a whole human being when they look up and ask me, what does it mean to be free? And this confidence that I have, that I would love to give to you all, this idea that graphic design is big enough to hold you and your whole human self, and that you don't have to be a sellout to do it. You don't have to destroy your community to do it. You don't have to work for an advertising agency that sells cigarettes to do it. You don't have to, you don't have to be on the wrong side of this conversation in order to participate in it. Those two things I would want you to be confident about. Because not only are things constantly changing in favor of your participation, but if you believe that communities come first, and that if you believe that good design should have no victims, then graphic design needs you. It needs you to step up. It needs you to be in participation in that community. It needs you to bring that reality into the atmosphere of this work. And you will be leading in no time. Because it is not the general belief of most designers that design should have no victims. It is not the general belief or priority of most designers that they be doing the exact right thing, and that their psyches are important, and who they are is important, and how they behave in community is important. So it needs you.
Well, thank you so much, Rick. This has been wonderful. And I'm inspired. I'm sure others are as well. So we appreciate your time here with us today. Yeah, so I guess on that note, we will dismiss for today. And thank you all who have attended all of our artist talks throughout this year. Rick is ending us, ending our series. And so I couldn't think of a better person to do that. So thank you guys. And